Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Amicable Divorce Network podcast. I'm your host, Tracy-Ann Moore-Grant, founder of the Amicable Divorce Network. And as you know, here in season 2, we are going chapter by chapter through our new book, Divorce Amicably, Your Roadmap to Resolution. This book is for clients, and it goes step by step through the process of divorce, decision making, and everything in it to get you to the end of your divorce as good as possible. We still know that it's going to be a bad process, and a lot of people are really scared, so we're here to give you some good information. I am joined today by one of our authors, Traci Weiss. She authored Chapter 24, Creating a Child-Centered Divorce, and we're going to jump into that important topic today. Traci, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me today.
So tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you're a part of the network and what you do professionally.
Okay, thank you. So I am a family law attorney. I have been practicing law for about 25 years now, and I also do guardian ad litem work. Much of my practice is focused on children's issues, child custody related matters. For those who don't know what a guardian ad litem is, investigating and making recommendations to the court and trying to help parties resolve issues specifically related to child custody. So I was glad to get to participate in this book and get to speak on this subject, because I think it's important for people to remember sometimes that divorce doesn't just impact the parents. When there are kids involved, it impacts every aspect of their life, and what the parents choose to do and how they choose to handle it can have a major impact on the children, not just during the divorce process, but in all of their relationships going forward.
Yeah, I think it's really important for people to understand that when they have kids, because a divorce is a very upsetting process for the parent personally, and it can really negatively impact children if it's not handled properly. I think it's important to point out that when Traci works as a guardian ad litem, she's investigating for the court the best interest of the child. And that's what a guardian ad litem, at least in Georgia, reports back to the court. And so she has extensive in this area. And at the Amicable Divorce Network, we really do try to get people focused on the kids and what's best for the kids, which is often hard in a divorce because people are personally very upset and tend to really think about themselves.
Yeah, and I always tell my clients that if both parents really are truly focused on what is in the best interest of the children and are able to look beyond their own hurt feelings, their own egos, things like that, there's always a way to reach an agreement. It's
Right.
only when those feelings get in the way and people can't put themselves in the perspective of the impact of everything on their children that they end up having more risk to have to leave everything up to a judge, to a stranger, to not only decide their fate based on how well they're able to come across in court that day, but also based on whatever mood the judge is in that day.
Yeah.
They're human, and sometimes they come in a bad mood, and when people are leaving everything up to them, the judge can do what they want, they can do what the other party wants, or they can do anything else that they think reasonably appropriate.
Yeah.
So, and they're not usually seeing the children in the middle of it,
Yeah, a lot of times the judge comes up with something nobody anticipated. It's sort of the third door where everybody's like, well, I didn't really expect that. I had a judge one time, we were having a conversation, and he said, I am always baffled that clients want me to decide their parenting plan. He was like, because I know the least. The parties know the most. They know their children the best. The attorneys who can be involved in negotiations and mediation know probably the second most and are up to date. And I get to see just the smallest snapshot of the family in order to make these important decisions. And I think that's really important for people to know. And some judges aren't family law experts.
Right. Some judges not only have never practiced family law, but they also don't appreciate being put in the position of deciding family law issues. A lot of times, I think that when a family goes in front of a judge to decide these types of super sensitive personal issues, the judge is not trying to figure out as much who did what as much as they're focused on who's being unreasonable. That if you have two reasonable people who are both focused on what's best for the children, they wouldn't need to leave it up to the judge.
Right.
If you have one person who is so incredibly unreasonable that they would rather leave it up to the judge than ever agree with you, you may have no choice. The judge realizes that they're the one being unreasonable. They're more likely going to come with an outcome that's going to be favorable for you. If they feel like you're both being unreasonable, you might both walk out of that courtroom not happy.
Yeah.
They are going to be, their job is to serve in loco parentis, to stand in the place of the parents if the parents can't reach that decision about what is in the best interest of the children. So, yeah, that's one of the great things about the Amicable Divorce Network is if you have everyone involved, the team that is advising both of the parties are focused on resolution and not on inflaming things, then you have a better chance of them being able to move beyond the hurt, at least for the purposes of coming up with a parenting plan. And that's kind of my whole approach to these custody issues is head over heart. It's, the pain is going to be there. Sometimes it'll dissipate throughout the process. Sometimes it's still there. Parties are either hurt or angry or a combination of both, but they still have to put the kids first. And if they can get beyond their feelings of negativity in whatever way towards the other party and still let the kids know, you don't have to worry about who to sit with at, activities and events, which side of the room to look at when you're in the school play because your parents are going to be sitting on opposite ends of the auditorium, things like that. That's going to alleviate a lot of stress and anxiety for the children. The counter to that is if they know that, their whole lives is going to be trying to navigate the feelings between their parents and not upset things and not result in a scene. Those are not only the kids that have to worry about, my elementary school graduation, is there going to be a blow up? Am I going to get embarrassed? Or am I going to upset one of my parents because I didn't go to them first when I came up with the risers? Those are the same ones that are going to have those same issues when they get married, things like that, where there's always going to be that stressor there for them. And that carries forward into all of their relationships, into romantic relationships, friendships, relationships even with their parents. So, that's one of the things I think is the most important thing is no matter what you're feeling at the beginning sets the tone for everything. It's to find a way to co-parent from the start and to say, you know what, no matter how I feel towards you, I'm going to keep you in the loop on what's important for the children. I'm going to make sure that you have reasonable access to them. I'm not going to make them feel like they have to feel bad if they want to have a picture of you or if they want to spend a little extra time with you. Maybe it's your scheduled time to have them, but they're like, I could really use some time with the other parent today. I'm wanting to do this sort of activity that's more their cup of tea, or they have more connection with this friend's parents and we want to get together and go to a park or something, things like that. Parents need to find a way to look at it from their children's perspective. And they didn't have a choice. There are those very rare occasions where I'll hear of teenagers who have sat their parents down and been like, you two are awful together, make each other so unhappy, why don't you just divorce already? But in 25 years I think I've heard that twice. More often than not, the children are saying, we didn't choose this, we don't have any say in this, and you're going to suddenly make it that I have two homes. Maybe my school might have to change. Maybe you're not going to get to come to all the same things that you used to. Who am I going to go to for homework help? Those sorts of things. The more that you can figure out how to navigate those things together, the better it'll be for them. And frankly, it's a good way, I think, to help parties focus on what matters most when they're navigating the divorce process. Because if they can get through the custody parts, the financials tend to be easier. I think a lot of times they're tied together for people emotionally.
And I think that, we see that with the house, we see that with child support. There's so many issues that overlap, that one of your biggest tips in your chapter, like you just touched on, is make decisions from a child's perspective. And one of the things I hear a lot from clients is something I would consider personally and professionally be relatively small, but ends up being a big deal to people. And that's the children's personal property and gifts. And I often have clients, they never bring back shoes or a winter coat, or, I gave them this great birthday gift and they immediately took it over, to the other parent's house. And I always try to give them, the feedback, you gave the child a gift. How would you have felt at 8 years old at Christmas if they were like, no, give that back. You don't get to play with that anymore. We're only here. And sometimes that resonates with parents and sometimes it doesn't, but I think to really put yourself in the child's shoes, how would you feel at that age? Look back in time about, a particular holiday or an event and try to make your decision making through that lens. Sometimes that's helpful for people.
I think that's a really good and important point. I think it's also really hard for children when you have that kind of dynamic and something doesn't get returned. Oftentimes the kids are put in the middle and they feel like they've done something wrong because they didn't remember to bring the item back, and that's causing their parents to fight with each other.
Right.
And so a lot of children will take that out on themselves emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
That leads to another topic in the chapter, which is not to lean on the children and don't put them in the middle.
Right.
Don't tell them, make sure that daddy returns, that coat or that,
mm-hmm.
Nintendo Switch or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Those communications, especially nowadays where you can, easily text each other or use a communication platform like Our Family Wizard or something like that, where you can have those communications with each other outside of earshot of the children.
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing this long enough that I remember the times where it was very rare for the parties to have any interaction except
mm-hmm.
when they were exchanging the child.
Yeah.
Nowadays, it's so easy to
mm-hmm.
do that and to not put the kids in the middle. Don't make them be the ones responsible for scheduling.
Yeah.
Don't make them be responsible for asking questions. Don't grill them about
mm-hmm.
whether the other parent is dating somebody else or where did they
mm-hmm.
take them. Did they take them somewhere? Did they feed them what you think is appropriately?
Right. Mm-hmm.
You had a child with this other person and you're going to be tied to each other in some way for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And they have rights. They might not have been a great spouse. They may not even be the best parent. But all you need is for them to be a loving parent and a good enough parent that's going to not harm your child so that your child knows that they have two people who love them unconditionally and will do anything for them, even if that means putting their feelings.
Yeah, I think, we've seen probably the spectrum. We've had contested cases where parties involve their children, and we've had contested cases where the kids are actually pretty insulated and might be surprised, to learn that, their parents had this level of discourse, which would be just the perfect scenario for everybody to follow. But, whether it's, like you're talking about grilling about dating or burdening the kids with keeping up with personal property, I did a video online about the personal property thing, and so many people were fighting in the comments, about, well, no, because I'll never get such and such back, whatever. Just like you're touching on, you can text the other parent, you can contact them on Our Family Wizard and say, hey, I need that back, or leave it on your porch, or pop it in the mail, or whatever the situation is, and not fight about those kinds of things. I think something else that is a sort of a technology thing that's important is kids often look at their parents' phone and might go through those text messages. So be careful about that, or delete, or be communicating on Our Family Wizard where it's separate and apart from your phone, because I've seen situations where the kid wants to play a game or something with the phone, which seems totally legitimate, but in the back they're trying to investigate what's going on with the parents, and they start scrolling through those text messages. You're nodding like you've seen this happen as well.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. That's one of those things where if you have a dynamic between two parents that is pretty acrimonious, having something like Our Family Wizard becomes so much more important because of the tone meter.
Yeah.
That's one thing that we don't have, that filter that I'm aware of anyway,
yeah.
on text messaging. But now that is standard for all accounts for Our Family Wizard, if somebody is sending a message and it's got a pretty negative tone to it, they're going to get stopped and
mm-hmm.
it's going to be pointed out, maybe you want to word this a little bit differently. Aside from the fact that the kids are less likely to see the messages that are going through there.
mm-hmm.
They still can have the app on their phone, and a lot of kids are
Yeah.
more technologically savvy than I am, at least.
Yeah, for sure.
To find things like that, but they're not going to have those same kind of negative communications if they have something like that that's going to filter them and flag them and say, hey, before you send this message, you might want to reword that. You might want to cool it down a little bit, because we all have those moments where, things get heated and we fire something off and then we wish that we hadn't hit send. In text messages, at least, if people are going to be communicating that way, it's helpful when you're communicating with your former spouse or the parent of your children to reread your messages before you hit send.
Yes.
Sometimes it's okay to leave them on read for a little while and not hit send back. It's better that than sending something that's ugly that you can't take back. And I always tell people to, even if you know that what you send back isn't going to be well received by the other parent, write it with the idea of, if a judge were to see it, how would it come across to them?
Or a child. Was it a professional and calm email, even if it disagreed? Or is it some sort of crazy email or text? Think of, how would somebody else, a stranger to the situation, look at this communication?
Right. And, if you can move forward with those types of things, I think it's a little bit easier than when you're trying to figure out a schedule, a parenting time schedule, and the details that need to go into a parenting plan. Figure out those things without it being about, what do I get?
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the hardest thing for parents, especially if they're coming out of a really heated relationship, that, if they feel like they've been gaslit and things like that, where they are on the defensive and suspicious of every move the other party makes. If both parents really tried to come up with a parenting plan that caused the least disruption for their children, then it would be a parenting plan that memorializes, for the most part, what you've historically done. And that's not to say that a parent who hasn't been as engaging, or, who has had to work more and things like that, isn't going to be able to do more after the divorce. But they also shouldn't be battling just because they want to win something, or because they want to punish the other parent. What the children are used to is their normal. And the more change, the more disruption to that, the more emotional harm can happen to the kids during all of this. I think it's also important that if you're having any of that kind of dynamic, to make sure that the children have a safe space to share their feelings, whether that's with a therapist for them, or a school counselor, or somebody that's not mom or dad.
Yeah.
That they don't have to worry about anybody else's feelings, and they can just have a safe space for their own feelings. Parents also have to take what their kids tell them with a grain of salt, because sometimes, especially in the more acrimonious types of divorces, the children want to make each parent happy, and so they will tell each parent what they think they want to hear. Those are some of the cases that get disputed the worst that I've seen, because each parent really believes that what they're doing is what the child really, really wants. And instead of avoiding having those conversations with the children and having them get to talk to a therapist separately, and leaving those adult conversations for the adults, if they're having those conversations with their children, a lot of times the children are trying to figure out, how do I make this parent feel good? How do I make that parent feel good? And they back themselves into a corner, even if they don't mean to. Suddenly they feel like they're caught in a lie. All they were trying to do is make everybody happy. And they don't understand that they're not the reason that everybody was unhappy in the first place.
Right. And I think something important you touched on is, really think about things, of course, from the child's perspective. And that really makes me think of also holiday schedules. I know you and I both also see this a lot, where maybe the family tradition was, at mom's family, they always had Thanksgiving lunch. And, as an example, and then the other parent will know that and intentionally really try to maybe chop up the day so that they can't do lunch, or do lunch every year, or something like that. And I want to try to make people think about major holidays from the child's perspective. Would you want to pack up your toys? Would you want to be in the car during this time, or on an airplane, or, something like that? What was your child experience like? I think people get really focused on holidays, and I'm in a blended family. I only have stepchildren. I couldn't tell you what holidays we had last year. because we celebrated the same. I have no idea what day it happened on. And people have a hard time thinking about that, but you want to think about creating a great day and a great memory for the kids, regardless of what day on the calendar.
Right, and access to extended family. You know, if you know that agreeing for them to travel on a day that's going to make it hard for them to be back with you when you would normally have them, but you know that they're going to get to spend time with certain relatives, cousins and whatnot, that they don't normally get to see, but that particular time of year, everybody on that side of the family gets together, you know, that's important for them, and that's not something that they can recreate, you know, and perhaps you can come up with something that would be a comparable opportunity with your side of the family, or that's important to you, that doesn't have to be an exact split it down the middle, alternate every other year. You know, those are jumping off points, and they're helpful jumping off points, but they don't have to be that way. If you leave it up to a judge, they're more likely to be that way. But if you're able to navigate things from the perspective of, okay, how do we normally do this? What do the kids tend to, you know, show interest in? You can get really creative sometimes and come up with a way that makes their experience as good as possible. And I really do think that when parents resolve those custody issues, they feel so much better about everything else. Sometimes, you know, suddenly they realize that the fear of, you know, is my child going to be turned against me? You know, am I going to not have access to them? Things like that. That can drive so much hostility in a divorce. And when they suddenly like, you know what, I'm good with this. This could really work. Then when they start looking at the financials,
it seems less important.
It seems less important, and it also seems more attainable.
Yeah. And I think another one of your tips about being flexible, one thing I always encourage people to do, and it's often so hard, is for them to be flexible about family events that might be, you know, sort of, I hate to say spontaneous, but, you know, grandma is very sick. You know, the child needs an opportunity to visit grandma, or a funeral or a wedding. Even if you have bad feelings about the other parent's family, you know, think about the child not being in those photos, not being able to say goodbye or at those events. You need to have some flexibility because life happens.
Right. And what access would the children have had if the family was still intact? If you hadn't had the divorce, would you have figured out a way to shift gears and make it work?
Yeah.
You know,
and what would you want if the script was turned and this was your situation? You know, think about that. You know, tit for tat will come back to you, because these occurrences happen usually evenly. So people really need to think about that as well.
Right.
Great chapter. If people are listening to this and they want to work with you, they want to learn more about a child-centered divorce, how can they reach you?
They can go to my website, which is weissfamilylaw.com. So it's WEISS familylaw.com.
And if you are driving and we don't want you to have an accident trying to write that down, you can save this episode and go to the show notes, and you will find all of Tracy's information there so that you can reach out to her. Tracy, thank you so much for joining me and for this very important chapter in the book.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.